Hey guys, Tom here again from synthhacker.com and welcome back to another tutorial for Native Instruments Massive. In this video we're going to be looking at recreating a kind of pad sound used a lot in like deep house by artists like Zoo, Disclosure, Gorgon City, artists like that really. And really pads can be used, cross genre. They can be quite similar sounding a lot of the time. So, you could probably use this for stuff like trance or anything really that needs a pad in like a breakdown or something like that. And yeah, it's just a really nice clean sound. I'll just quickly demonstrate the sound for you using some chords from the Disclosure and London Grammar track. So a really nice, clean, pure pad sound that you can use to pad out your tracks. And really you can adjust this a lot as well and take this in a lot of different directions and kind of make it your own as well. So we're going to go ahead and initialize the patch here. As always guys, if you haven't done already, please subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with future tutorials as well as this one. And also, if you haven't done so already, definitely go ahead and check out my Massive preset pack. It's called the Massive Mega Pack, which actually contains over 500 presets, all handcrafted by me, which is currently on sale as well. Definitely go ahead and check that out if you haven't done already over at synthhacker.com or click the link in the description below. But without further ado, let's begin creating this really nice pad sound. So the first thing we're going to do is just make sure that the sound is polyphonic. Obviously pad sounds typically use chords. We're going to be playing more than one note at a time. The next thing we're going to do is move the unison amount of voices to 5. So each oscillator is outputting 5 different voices that we're going to slightly detune using the unison spread function, the pitch cutoff function. And this is just going to really kind of soften and thicken up the sound nicely. Next, we're going to go into oscillator 1 and 2. We're going to pitch oscillator 2 up a whole octave above oscillator 1. And the wavetable we're going to use for these for the sound is the sine triangle wavetable. But we're actually going to move the wavetable position all the way to the left. Now, typically, obviously, sine waves are the purest tone, and on their own they can be quite dull and boring. But we're going to do a few things to kind of make the sound a little bit more interesting, add some nice harmonics. And the first thing I'm going to do to achieve this is actually use one of the warp modes, which is the bend plus minus or minus plus warp mode. And we're just going to use this for both of these oscillators. And what this does is essentially, depending on which way you put the intensity knob, it either stretches or squashes the waveform, so it kind of drastically changes the sound really, and gives you a lot of control over whether you just hear like a pure sine wave or like a stretched or squashed version of it, which will obviously produce much more interesting harmonics. We're going to route this, make sure that these are being routed through the filter 1. Because we're actually going to get onto that in a second. We're going to run them in series. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is actually set up a nice slow moving LFO to detune both of these oscillators a little bit, just to give it like a bit of an analog feel. And what we're going to do, we're going to move the X fade curve all the way up, so we've just got a nice pure sine LFO. We're going to turn restart off, so it's not being restarted at the start of every note. It's just going to be a nice free moving LFO. And then we're going to drag and drop this onto the pitch of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 as well. So the next thing we're going to do is dive into the modulation oscillator. What I did for this sound was just add a little bit of phase modulation, which is essentially just the same thing as frequency modulation if you've ever used a synth like FM8, or I can't remember what the equivalent is in FL Studio. I think it's like Citrus or something like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to modulate phase modulation on oscillator 1. And then we're going to pitch this up an octave as well and bring this right down. And what I actually did was set up a macro to control this. And if we just get rid of this vibrato control by right clicking and clear macro, we don't really need that. We're going to set up a macro here and we're going to drag and drop it onto the phase of the modulation oscillator. And this is just going to be really subtle, so we can really finely control the amount of phase modulation that's going on in the sound. And again, kind of like the warp modes, this is going to add some really nice, interesting upper harmonics to the sound, which I'll demonstrate in just a second. But the other thing that I did was also just add a little bit of white noise with the color all the way up, just to add a little bit of kind of interest to the sound and just kind of fill out the frequency range a little bit as well. The next thing I did was go into the insert section and go on the high pass low pass filter. And if you push the low pass filter up and then push the high pass filter up a little bit, essentially what this is going to do is really clean away and cut out all the muddy low end. Typically, pad sounds, you really don't want too much low end, and it sounds muddy because typically, you know, the low end in a mix will just be using one note, whereas if you're using a chord as a pad sound, and then that pad sound has a lot of low end, all those frequencies produced by the notes that are in kind of like a lower octave will kind of interfere with each other and make it sound much more muddy. So if you do want a bass element underneath this in a background, I'd just in kind of a breakdown, I'd recommend just using another synth with just like the bottom note of each chord in the pad, if that makes sense, rather than using the pad sound for the low end. The next thing we're going to do is set up the filter section. We're going to push this slider up, so we're using the filters in series. We're going to use a low pass 2 dB filter, low pass 2 pole filter, which is a 12 dB filter in filter 1, and then we're going to use the daft filter for filter 2. We're going to bring the mix amount down to 2, so the signal is being passed through the low pass 2 pole filter and then through our daft filter as well. We're just going to make sure that we have amplitude coming out of here. We're going to bring the resonance down on both of these filters. We're going to push the cutoff of filter 1 up to just below halfway and bring the daft filter cutoff down. So far we just have this. Which is kind of getting towards the sound that we're looking for, but at the minute, you know, it's a little bit boring. And what I did, the reason I set up these filters like I did, was essentially so that we can use a filter to slowly move the mix amount. So at the start of the sound, we're just hearing the signal from the daft filter, which is low passed quite heavily, and then over time we're going to hear some of the higher harmonics being passed through the low pass filter, which has a higher cutoff than the daft filter. So what we're going to do, we're going to go in envelope 3, we're going to move the attack to about halfway, we're going to bring the sustain all the way up and give it a little bit of release, and then we're going to drag and drop this onto the mix amount here and push this up a little bit. And what you'll hear now is, I don't know why this isn't working for some reason, there we go. What you'll hear now is over time the sound will open up and you'll hear much more like higher frequency sound. We can make this take longer as well by increasing the attack. So that's just a really, really cool effect. You could do this also just by using the modulating the cutoff frequency, but either one works really. The next thing we're going to do is go into the amplitude envelope of the sound, and we're going to soften up the attack. By default, envelope 4, as you can see up here, is the envelope for the amplitude. We're just going to soften up the attack a little bit here so that we have a nice soft sound, which we obviously want for a pad, and just bring the sustain down a little bit and give it a little bit of release as well. And then what we're going to do is dive into the effects section to really kind of polish the sound up a little bit. The first thing we're going to add is some chorus. Chorus is really great on pads. It's really great for thickening sounds up. We're going to bring the dry wet down a little bit, and then we're going to add a really nice reverb as well. We're going to keep the size and dry wet around where they are, bring the density down a little bit and increase the color so we're getting some nice high frequencies in that reverb. And then what we're going to do, we're going to use Massive's internal low shelf EQ to, again, just clean out some of the muddy low end, so we're just getting a nice clean pad sound. So now we have this. And that's really much closer to the sound that we're actually looking for. And then I'll just show you some phase modulation as well. I'm going to move this macro that we set up a little bit, so we're getting a nice little bit of phase modulation. Really, that's down to personal preference in terms of like how much phase modulation you want. It's just really nice. It's almost like adding a little bit of distortion. It's really, really cool. And yeah, that's pretty much the basics of the sound. Definitely, you could take this a lot of different ways. You could play around with some different wavetables. You know, play around with the modulation, the warp mode intensity. It gives you a lot of different timbres and stuff. And this is just a really great template for those like house pads that are used in tracks from people like Disclosure and Zoo and Gorgon City, etc. And yeah, that's pretty much the sound, guys. If you found it useful, please subscribe and leave a like. I really appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, anything like that, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. As always, guys, if you haven't done already, please go ahead and check out my Massive Mega Pack, which contains over 500 presets for Massive over at synthhacker.com, or click the link in the description below. But that's all from me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.